If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Serious, Reddit, what are your creepy encounters with something that you are convinced was paranormal? I worked graveyard shift in a dementia ward for 4 years and it was anything but quiet. I was working with a nurse one night when we both heard a resident say "excuse me." We looked around and no one was there. I checked on the resident in question and she was fast asleep in her own room. Many of us also experienced someone whistling in the ward late at night and one nurse even managed to catch a video of it happening. It was unnerving to say the least. When I was a teenager, I went on a road trip from BC to Saskatchewan with my aunt, my mom and my 2-year-old cousin to visit my uncle. He and his wife lived in an older farmhouse in the prairies that was built early to mid-1800s, not a lot of renovations done except the kitchen and bathroom, so definitely had a vibe to it. One night after dinner, my toddler cousin was playing with a recorder, the wind instrument you play in elementary school, nothing special, just messing around as kids do. We had dessert, watched a movie, then headed upstairs to bed. My mom and I were sharing a room. We settled in for the night and chit-chatted a bit about the day, and we began to nod off when I hear a quiet melody coming from the kitchen, located below our room. I assumed it was my tired brain playing tricks on me and passed it off as nothing and tried to fall asleep. Then I heard it again, a few distinct notes from what sounded like a recorder. My eyes flew open and my mom and I turned to each other at the exact same moment and whispered, "Did you hear that?" We laid there, wide-eyed in the darkness while a few more faint notes drifted up the staircase, until eventually we fell asleep. My mom and I tell the story the next morning at breakfast, and speculate whether my cousin escaped from her crib for a moonlight sonata. The thing is, at this time she didn't even know how to get out of her crib, and my aunt was such a helicopter parent there's no way she could have jumped the crib, opened the door and make it all the way downstairs without my aunt waking up. My uncle chimes in and says in the early 1900s a doctor and his daughter lived in this farmhouse. She contracted tuberculosis and he had to perform an emergency tracheotomy that tragically failed. I was told there is a grave in the backyard in between those 2 trees. And points out the window. I'd like to think the little girl ghost was awakened by my cousin's presence in the house and wanted to try the recorder herself. The next day I was left alone in the house and kept psyching myself out and looking out the window at those 2 trees in the backyard expecting to see something. I've had plenty. But it's the first experience that I remember best. I was 14 to 15 years old. I shared a cramped room with my younger brother. We lived in an old barn loft that was converted into a livable space. Our bed sat parallel. His, the one on the left facing into the room, was closest to the door. At the foot of my bed, about 5 feet away and to the left, was a small closet door. The door was only about 5 feet tall. I'm asleep. As is often the case in my episodes, I just kind of suddenly am aware that I'm unable to move. Breathing is difficult, like I'm drowning without my lungs filling with water, and my mind screams that I need to move to wake myself. Suddenly, I can see my room. This might sound nuts, but whenever I have an episode, and this sight happens, I'm seeing through my eyelids. I can feel my eyes are shut, but I can see my surroundings. Out of the small closet door pokes a flat-brimmed hat atop a long-haired head. Then shoulders. Then elbows, and a long thin leg. This tall dark figure just smoothly sucks out of the closet and stands in front of my bed. He just stands there. I can sort of see him sway side to side, but other than this, he's motionless. I can hear this muffled heartbeat racing in my ear. I hear myself hyperventilating. I can hear it, but it's like I'm listening to these things underwater. I still can't move. Then I hear his voice in my head. No movement. He just says, "There are people who watch from behind the walls." And he gestures to the wall behind him. The wall turns translucent red, and I see what look like deformed children in rags. They're speaking, but in whispers, and I can't understand a word. They moved around like ants. He starts laughing, but still remains like a statue. And, snap. It felt like a firecracker in my right ear. I shoot out of bed. I actually landed out of bed on my feet. We didn't have carpet, just this thick plywood type crap that made every footstep sound like a stomp. My brother woke up and asked what I was doing. I just blurted out, I tripped, and crawled back into bed. It was around 3 a.m. I stayed awake until I heard the birds outside, then I went downstairs. Messed me up for a while. When I was a young child, I had an imaginary friend who I would sit up with at night and speak to at length. My mother would have to come in every night and tell me to go to bed, to much protest till she said goodnight to my friend as well. This went on for years. I would speak to my friend, a monk, a dark cloaked figure who had no real features I can remember, but would sit on the end of my bed quite peacefully. This went on for so long my mother got concerned, as I wasn't growing out of the phase of having an imaginary friend, so she had me checked from the neck up, to which I was proven to be as perfectly sane as any ordinary child. The paranormal part of this is that no one else ever saw him, until one night one of my aunts stayed over, and I had to give up my room for her. In the dead of the night she screamed the house awake, ran down the stairs so quick she missed a step, fell down the stairs and near broke her ankle, just a very nasty sprain if I correctly recall. Whilst waiting for her to calm down, she apparently exclaimed about a dark figure in my room with her. In the midst of all this, she refused to go back upstairs and I was kicked from the sofa back to my room, to which a groggy me just said told ya, come on Ben, time for bed, with a sense of elation of being proven sane. Later research into the house revealed we lived on the grounds of a former monastery. We moved that summer and I never saw my friend again. Former atheist, now I just don't know. I feel like something is out there, but I don't know because I can't understand what happened to me. Brief backstory, had a falling out with my mom. Didn't speak to each other for about 2 years. When I was a little kid my mom would push her fingernails into my back, and just scratch my back all over. It was such a calming feeling, and was something I really enjoyed when I was really upset. So I'm sitting at home one day, playing with my dog. I sit on the couch and get this really weird feeling, like sorrow and sadness. Suddenly I feel a calming nail scratch all over my back. I'm sort of freaking out, but also enjoying it. Like, what the hell is causing my back to feel like this? What felt like several minutes, was probably 20 seconds. Snapped out of it and jumped off the couch, checked my back, and I had freaking scratch marks all over it. 30 minutes later my sister calls me and tells me mom has passed away about 30-ish minutes ago. That's roughly the same time I was felt with a random bout of sorrow, and suddenly had nail scratch marks on my back. I can't explain that, I don't know what happened and I don't understand it. Back in my teen years I lived on an old tobacco farm in Maryland. The property was massive and sold individually. There was a few houses on this old farm and a long narrow road connecting where I lived to a quarter sack. As a kid and growing up with the older neighborhood kids, we were all very close and would tease each other about haunting and ghost sighting and whatnot. But there was the one house at the end of the road I lived on, the biggest house on the old farm that a family well called the Davidsons lived in. It was very old style but remodeled. We always knew it as the White House as that's where the white farm owners lived. This was a hoax to me and my brother we always thought, but being the wild kid I was one day went behind the house adventuring and stumbled across a graveyard. All the headstones very old and weirdly they labeled Davidson past relatives down generations. Earliest was 1830-ish, it's been about 30 years, memory is rough, this wasn't the scary part, this is backstory. Fast forward some time and it was Christmas 1992 and we had this brand new Sony camcorder. This same year we had a new neighbor, across the farm down the long dirt road. Some context, down this road there were 2 barns, 1 house. This was directly across from the White House through some bushes but was not connected via traditional road. These new neighbors were very curious and lived in the haunted house. This house was very old. I became real good friends with the new neighbor and he had an older brother who liked ghost hunting. He would explain that they lived in the slave house, and we would explore the old barns. They had this basement, some conjuring type shit, that we would never go down. It was locked by the previous owner, we found later it was the Davidsons, and never given a key. One night we busted it open when his parents weren't home and went and took a look. Seemed to be an old garage area, but when you walked down the wooden stairs directly to the left were 2 to 3 nooses, and chains. Dirt stains and old clothes, all over the floor. We then ran upstairs. A few days later we went in the barn, this is where the paranormal stuff happened. We were always told that an orb would show on camera if a ghosted was sighted, and in the nighttime us curious teenagers used the camera to explore the barn. While taking a video we opened and started to walk around. Hanging on the second level was 3 to 4 nooses, and chains on the sides. The nooses were swinging left and right, then a deep loud I would say scream. We turned around, ran but kept recording. When we later looked back at the footage we noticed multiple orbs. And feet, dark outline of male or female feet on the sides of the barn where the nooses were hanging. Family and I stayed at our vacation home one December. We got there late in the day so we decided to only clean my parents' room, which had a massive bed in it, could easily fit the 4 of us. We sat there watching TV and during commercial breaks I would rest my eyes. Well, one commercial I closed my eyes, this time I instantly fell into a nightmare. I could remember being in my house walking around when suddenly a dark shadow begins to engulf the room, grabbing me by my feet. At this point I am awake but unable to move. After a few seconds of struggling I finally broke free, sitting upright while the same time my brother also shot up. We looked at each other and without saying a word we knew whatever just happened we both experienced it. At the time I was in my mid-teens and my brother was early 20s, so we were able to keep our composure. We told our parents that something tried to scare us and they told us not to worry. I wasn't having it as I was the one at the edge of the bed, so I told Pops to switch with me. Lol. As the night went on, we began to hear footsteps coming down the stairs, a tile on the floor cracking in half and the TV turning on/off. All the while my dad, who played it off, was acting suspicious. I could see him trying to cover his left shoulder with a blanket and we noticed he was leaning to the left. When he suddenly freaked out, telling whatever was there to fuck off. At this point we were wide-eyed cause I've never seen my Pops just freak out like that. He told us that he felt something pushing down on his left shoulder. Now when we go, I no longer stay there. I go over to my grandma's, who's less than a mile away. This happened when I was in middle school, around 2002-2003. I was playing with a Ouija board with a friend on the bunk bed in my bedroom that I shared with my little sister. My friend and I were on the top bunk playing and connected with a spirit. Being skeptical and wanting to scare ourselves, we kept asking the spirit to prove to us that they were really there. My friend bravely volunteered to put a hair tie on her outstretched finger and hang her arm out over the edge of the bunk bed. We asked the spirit to lift up the hair tie, slide it off of her finger, and drop it to the ground. Whatever we were speaking to, they obliged, because this hair tie levitated off of my friend's finger and suspended itself in air for a few seconds before sliding off of her finger and dropping to the floor. My friend did not do anything to make the hair tie act the way it did. There's no way she could have done it because we tried to replicate it afterwards. Needless to say, it really spooky. We got the scare we were looking for. It wasn't too long after that my parents confiscated the Ouija board and I haven't messed around with one since. Ouija boards give a new meaning to fuck around and find out. Something came into my cabin while I was sleeping. I tell this story periodically, in the hopes that someone might have information. I woke from a dead sleep to see this thing crouching down by my bedside. It was wrong, off somehow. The muzzle was strange and the limbs were oddly articulated. It sounded like it was muttering, but the tone was low and rumbling and I couldn't make out any words. I freaked out and mashed the light switch and it took off on all fours. Left scratches in the hardwood as it bolted outside. I tell myself it was just a deer with wasting disease or something. It was too big to be any of the other local critters, and the rack of antlers should have been a giveaway. I guess it just happened to stroll into our cabin that we just happened to leave wide open. I've always wished I got a better look. I didn't sleep the rest of the night there, and we left the next morning. I didn't tell my fiancé until we got home. We had been camping outside in like a makeshift garage in one of our favorite camping spots. There were about 6 of us occupying the area, and in the moment this paranormal moment happened, only 2 of us were left at our camp spot. Everyone else had left to go for showers or other things while me and my other female cousin stayed behind. It was probably around 11 a.m. to 12 a.m., so it was dark when this happened, but we were laying in our bed talking when in the corner of my eye I could clearly see a white figure standing in the distance. I stared at it for a while, still making conversation with my cousin but then saying, "Do you see that?" Which my cousin had. Yes, I thought I could only see it. The figure was standing still between these 2 poles. And even though the moon was shining, we knew it wasn't the moonlight's rays that was causing this sort of figure, because the white figure was clearly in a spot where it was darkness or where the moonlight couldn't reach. We were both just staring at the figure, but in that moment I do not think any of us, in any way, felt scared. We still stared at it, making comments like, "If you come near us, we will scream," or "What happens if it suddenly appears in front of us?" Mind you, we're both paranormal believers and I guess we were waiting to see if anything would happen. But then the figure slowly floated away into the darkness. Again, we both were just stared at the spot the figure was because we were in shock. Later on, after everyone returned, we didn't really say anything to them. I think we kind of forgot. But it was now 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. in the morning and all 6 of us were up telling jokes, but now we were getting into the ghost stories. Right then I explained to the group what me and my cousin had seen, and I kid you not, 2 of the boys in the group were like, "Oh, is it standing over there, behind the 2 poles?" Me and my cousin and the 2 boys just stared at one another. I couldn't believe they'd seen it too. What made it more interesting was I never told them the exact spot we had seen the figure, but they had literally in the moment described exactly where me and my cousin had seen the figure. I asked them how'd they know where it stood. They just simply replied with, "I seen it the other night, and woke him up so I wasn't the only one to see it." A few years ago, back when I lived alone and before I got married, I was sitting at my computer one day and heard a thunk in the kitchen. Now I have cats, so I thought one of them had gotten up on the counter and knocked something down. I got up to investigate and saw the strangest thing. At the time, I kept the salt and pepper shakers on the back of the stove. They were big heavy-duty glass dispensers, the kind that you'd probably have to throw to the ground with force to break, and you could probably use them to knock a person unconscious if you needed to. To the right of the stove there is a small section of counter, probably about 18 inches long, between the stove and the refrigerator. At the time, I kept my toaster there. When I heard the thunk and went into the kitchen, the salt shaker was gone off the back of the stove. Instead, it was beside the toaster on that small wedge of counter, against the wall, upside down. It was upright, but balanced on its top rather than set on its bottom. If something had knocked the shaker down, it would have hit the stove top and rolled. There was literally no way it could have gotten from where it was to where I found it without being deliberately picked up and moved. There was also not a single grain of salt anywhere except underneath it when I went to lift it and put it back. I tried several times myself to turn that shaker upside down and balance it on its head like it was, and it took some effort to get it to stay on its top, and I couldn't do it smoothly enough or fast enough to not spill some of the salt in the action of just turning it over. I absolutely cannot explain it. I'm still not sure if this was paranormal or I was gullible as hell, but it creeped the shit out of me. Back in 2003 I was in Scotland for a 2-week trip. It was a program for international students at a university, forgot which. I was assigned a shared bedroom with another girl from my country. This girl was obsessed with roses. She had roses in every single one of her clothes, she had rose pendants, rose earrings, roses everywhere. And she was obsessed with the paranormal too. Now, going into Scotland as 13-year-olds, we were told the place was full of ghost stories and stuff, we were dumb kids. So this girl was right in her zone. She starts asking me to take pictures of the creepy looking basement. It was an analog camera back then, and no way I was gonna waste a photo with that, because someone had told her a kid had died there. You know, rumors spread to scare kids. She used to tell little stories about stuff like, spiritism or whatever. Like how she had some sort of sixth sense. It was a long time ago. Anyway, those were the two things she was obsessed with, roses and paranormal. Then one day, she tells me why she is obsessed with roses. Apparently she used to have a sister. The child passed away very young, I think as a toddler still, around 2 yo. This girl was, obviously, gutted. Then one day, she claims to have looked up at the skies and said, "Sis, if you're there, send me a rose," and when she looked down she found something with a rose on it. I think it was a spoon with a rose engraved. Anyway, me and my friends at the time, being dumbass kids, were thoroughly creeped by this kid. The story, albeit sad, didn't help. Especially for the amount of roses she wore, seriously, it was everywhere. One night, I'm sleeping in my bed. I wake up out of nowhere. I look around, nothing's going on. Girl is sleeping in the bed next to me. Then all of a sudden, my pillow gets pulled just a little. I look to my side, but she's still there, sound asleep. And my pillow gets pulled again. And again. And again. Just little by little. Like somebody was trying to snatch that pillow from under my head. I was wide awake, couldn't explain what the hell was happening, and just froze. I pulled my covers to my neck and waited until morning. The pillow pulling just went on for about half an hour, I think, and then stopped. Then came the second night. Our bedroom had a sink in it, where we brushed our teeth before bed, obviously. That day, we foreign kids had decided to buy the most touristic thing possible, a red plaid hat with horns and ginger braids, because we just thought that was the most Scottish thing in the world. I had set mine on the sink and just left it there. The girl and I were talking, and this was the end of our trip, the last week, we had maybe 3 days left, and then we were going back home. By now, everyone was spooked by this girl. She just had a vibe. If the constant stories, the insistence on finding paranormal shit, and her going on and on about roses and her dead sister wasn't enough. I'm saying this because, by this point, there was some animosity. I got along all right with her, but most of the others didn't. She wasn't being excluded, but there was a weird vibe in the air. Which, to this day, if I try to find a logical explanation within the paranormal one, this is the one. So this night, I turn around, glacé at my stupid Scottish tourist bait hat, and I swear on the Lord, one of the braids was just fucking floating in the air. It was like someone was pulling the ribbon and lifting it like you would a marionette. It even shuddered a little, like it could barely hold. At that moment, I swear to God, I said oh fuck no, grabbed a pillow, knocked on my friend's room and said, "Scoot, I'm sleeping here tonight." I remember telling the girl what I had seen, and she wasn't bothered in the slightest. She was just like, "Oh, okay," and moved along. I didn't even care that I left her there. To this day I can't explain this, and a greater part of me is honestly willing to believe I was just a gullible, impressionable, dumbass 13-year-old. But a part of me kept thinking that was the girl's sister, wasn't it? I made fun of the roses thing and she taunted me. For years, I stuffed that stupid plaid hat deep inside a box and couldn't even look at it. I was a fully formed adult when I finally brought that hat out and had the courage to touch it again. I swear, for years it was like I was expecting it to move again. Not fun. Never seen that girl again either. When I was about 8 years old, my family had just gotten back from a vacation at Lake Powell in Utah. On the way back we stayed in the Hotel Colorado in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Now, like I said, I was 8 and this is before smartphones were as big as they are now, and every 8-year-old has an iPad. So that being said, my parents knew damn well that the hotel was haunted. However, I did not, because I did not have internet access. That being said, the second we walked into the hotel I instantly said, this place is haunted, I do not like it here. The bellhop looked like a regular bellhop, but a 8-year-old me was weirded out because he was in an old traditional red button down with a weird hat. We then got to our rooms, which, if you've ever stayed in the Hotel Colorado, they were just as they were back in the 1800s. They may have gotten some updates since, but that's how they were then. We went and got food, and while we were eating, a baby bird fell out of a tree and landed in my mom's cocktail. Being Colorado natives, we knew well that's not out of the normal, seeing as it probably tried to leave the nest and the boot bird didn't fly. So we just went on with our day. After dinner we decided that we were going to go play mini golf. At that moment, when we were on some hole, another baby bird fell out and, I kid you not, made a hole in one. We thought that was creepy as all get out, but still my parents did not let on that the hotel's on it. Then came nighttime and my brother and I were in one room and my parents were in another workroom connected by a Jack and Jill bathroom. I laid there for probably 5 minutes and then said, nope, fuck this, I'm going to sleep with mom and dad again. I was pretty young, and by now I figured out that this hotel was on it. Not by my dad telling me by young kids having some intuition with such things. Then as I got in my dad's room, it was about 8 o'clock at night. Like I said, this hotel is super old and has those old wrap things above the door. Before I knew it, every single one of them in the hallway closed at the same time, just one solid thump, and all of them were closed. After that I laid in bed and promptly fell asleep. My dad did not. Later on he said that the door to the room opened and he saw an orb enter and the door shut. Will not be returning. That being said, story isn't over. My brother then went to a popular place that teenagers go to cliff dive and other such activities. Then he saw the bellhop in full getup. Full uniform. Over 2 hours away from the hotel. Ouija boards and me don't mix well. I've gotten messages in languages that I don't speak quoting Bible verses, and I've never read the Bible. I pop these into Google Translate and it just weirds me out because I can't explain how this would occur. Or they say bizarre messages like, damn, I got through to an oracle, can you pass this message along to so-and-so? Objects being moved, things floating I can chalk up to some sort of physics or even a hallucination, but the weird messages that I can't possibly have generated coming through on a Ouija board have me stumped. Also, one time a woman visited me in a dream and warned me that I was in danger and that she, and others, were trying to protect me from the cardinal that was coming for me. Soon after, a cardinal started flying headfirst into the glass of my window repeatedly. What's more, it would wait for me at my bus stop and follow me down the road or wait across the street in a tree and watch me. I always imagined someday I would find that woman who was watching out for me. My uncle lived with us and died in 2009 from pneumonia in his bedroom. When he was drunk and heard noise from our room, like if we had a fan on or something, he would pound on the wall like 3 heavy bangs across in a line. After he died at random, I would hear the knocks still, and my mum heard it at the same time, so it wasn't in our imagination. She used to tell me it was just the house and pipes settling, but I knew she was lying because of the look on her face. Years and years pass of this happening on and off, and my boyfriend would stay at mine, and one night it happens and he jumped out of his skin. My pets could also hear it, especially my dog, who would bark at it. My boyfriend and pets has heard this with me multiple times, 3 clear bangs on the wall like my uncle used to do. I have had a friend over who was sleeping on the sofa bed downstairs and felt an angry presence standing over him inches from his face, which caused him to leave the next day. I had another friend who felt intense fear when she visited and left within 10 minutes, and another friend who felt really bad atmosphere in my home. My house has always had a bad vibe even before my uncle died, but it is worse since he went. I even had an issue where I found his watch and his belongings and tried it on, and I felt an evil force and had to take it off, and I threw it across the room. I was left with a headache and feeling drained. What puzzles me though is my uncle was not evil. He did have the alcohol issues due to past traumatic experiences, but he never hurt us, and he was lovely sober, so I don't get the negative vibes from his room or the massive increase of activity in the house since he went. Creepiest thing was Barney. Yes, that evil purple dinosaur thing. When my daughter was around 3, now 27, she received a stuffed, singing Barney plushie. Push his belly and he sings or speaks. Uck. It was my one rule for gifts for her, no Barney. Oh well, too late, she likes it. She never watched the show though. So anyway, after a few months, it started malfunctioning by randomly singing by itself. Changed the batteries, all good for a week or two, then he'd do it again. Truth is, she didn't care if it did it. Well, until he started singing at night, repeatedly, while she was sleeping. She didn't like him so much anymore. I took the batteries out, explained he was now just a quiet stuffy now, and tossed him in the toy box to be forgotten. About a year later, the sound of a dying electronic voice grumbled from the bottom of the toy box. I pulled everything out until I find the culprit, Barney, attempting his I Love You song. I open up the battery compartment only to find that it's still empty. I told it to shut the fuck up and threw it in the outside trash can. The other was an Ouija board that took me 10 years to throw away. I kept finding it in weird places months to 2 years between attempts. I ended up having to destroy it. When I was in middle school, my best friend, who would later become my partner, threw a birthday party and invited myself, as well as 4 other kids to come over and stay the night. The day started off pretty standard. We all hung out in the basement of my partner's house and had pizza, cake, snacks, played video games and watched movies. We watched my partner open presents and had a relatively drama-free evening. After dark, when my partner's family had gone to bed, we decided to whip out and use a Ouija board that they had lying around. It was a cheap Hasbro one that had been purchased at Toys R Us. We all gathered in a circle and set one finger each on the planchette, then began asking basic questions like, is there anyone there? Or is there someone here who would like to speak with us? I'd never used one before, so you can imagine my surprise when the planchette started moving and answering the questions we asked coherently. The entity we spoke with claimed to be a little girl and said that she had been from around the area my partner lived at the time. At one point I decided to ask the little girl to give us a sign that she was actually there. In that moment, I felt an intense chill make its way up my spine, and my skin was instantly prickled with goosebumps. Not long after, my partner unexpectedly started sobbing, and I would later learn that they'd saw something dark run up to one of the basement windows and look in at us. Once we were good and freaked out, we ended the conversation with the little girl and put the Ouija away. The rest of the night was uneventful and we eventually all drifted off to sleep. The next morning, after all the other kids had went home, I was my partner's best friend, as I mentioned, so I had planned to stay later. My partner's grandmother came over to visit. She is a very spiritual woman and it's known amongst their family that she has a deeper than average connection with the spirit world. We very excitedly told her about our experience with the Ouija board and she suddenly went pale. She told us to get rid of the Ouija board immediately by burning it. And she made us promise never to do it again. We threw it in the garbage and didn't speak of it again until we were adults. Both of us had such a bad vibe after what happened that we agreed not to bring it up out of fear for what our words could conjure. I have never used one since, nor do I ever plan to. The little girl we spoke with seemed harmless enough, but there was no way to know for sure. There's also no way for us to know if it even was a little girl we were speaking with. I have a few. 1. When I was a kid I spent a lot of time in my grandma's house. Specifically I played in the basement because it was just as big as the upstairs area. It was also fully furnished and there were plenty of places to play. I used all the rooms except for one. To paint the right picture, the basement had 6 rooms and 3 were down a long hallway starting with a bedroom, sauna, and bathroom at the end. The bedroom terrified me. In order to get to the other rooms, I would sprint down the hall and jump past the doorway of the bedroom. I had this fear that something was going to reach out and grab me from within that room. That room had no windows yet I remember it being surprisingly bright when the lights weren't on. My parents stayed there when they were first married, for a few months and slept in that room. My mom said she had terrible nightmares the whole time. Their cat also went missing for several days and they looked everywhere for her. My dad was retrieving something from the basement room and he opened a drawer and she was trapped inside it. She was alright but the creepy thing is that nobody had been in there before she went missing. 2. I lived in a dorm room that had a haunted TV. Setting items on the TV would cause things to happen. My friend saw full apparitions there. She said that one night she saw me, standing up petting the stuffed dog that I had. Except that when she looked up as to my bed, I was in it. She also said that I was sitting in my closet one night, except that once again I was still in bed. We left for a holiday once and when returned all of the figures she had were neatly arranged on my bed. I also had one morning where it felt like something was pulling me off my bed. It woke me up before I reached the edge. The last incident was when we placed the remote in the middle of the room and asked the TV to specifically turn itself on and then back off. It did both. This was an old TV too. Not a smart TV. 3. I've had a couple experiences at the museum where I work. One was before we remodeled the main building. A group was in with their residents to visit the museum. One of the residents was taken back to the van, but the caretaker didn't inform the other workers of the decision. They thought that she had wandered away by herself. We all searched for her until she was located. I went back behind the stage area to check and called out hello. Someone responded hi right in my ear, but there was no one visibly next to me. I've seen a woman in Victorian dress out of the corner of my eye before. We had an incident where all the guns in our vault were apparently rearranged and laid down on both sides around the wall. I had been in the day before and they were all fine. They weren't damaged, so they didn't fall. They are all very well secured now. Items from the shelves have been found laying in the middle of the aisles with no way to have gotten there. That's what I can think of right now. I don't know if it was creepy, but I was creeped out lol. Latino culture, or my country at least, tends to be super believers in that stuff. I'm on the fence, but as an agnostic in a Catholic family, the stories and warnings as a child stick with me. My maternal family home out of the US is 100 plus years old. It's pretty big, and there the houses are very Spanish style, I guess, where there's a patio on the inside and the rooms in the outer square. I was home alone with my grandmother visiting after my grandfather's funeral. He was the first real death in my family and was an absolute gem. The entire family was destroyed emotionally. A few days after his funeral, I'd why we were home alone because literally everyone is always home or we're all out together. I went to get a snack in the kitchen, which in the recent renovations had been my late great uncle's room. My mom and grandmother were so upset that I hadn't really cried it out yet. So I sat on the stool, in this dark open air house, and sobbed. I don't know why then, but it just poured out of then 15-year-old me. Context: my grandfather was very sweet and quiet man. Stereotypically, my grandmother was the type of woman who'd throw her slipper at your head for looking at her wrong, but never knew how to show physical affection because of his upbringing. So, awkward hugs aside, he would always pat people on the back. Infamously, he always hit a bit too hard and I tended to be caught off guard and always stumbled forward. I also hate being in the house alone or unaccompanied because of the superstition lol. Many of my family members have died in the home and it's incredibly dark and silent. Stray cats tend to land in the patio scaring the stuffing out of you at night. I've lived in condos in major US cities my whole life, and I'm a Wimplemau. As I'm sitting in this chair crying with my face in my hands, I'm struggling to breathe and cry quietly to not upset my grandmother. I had my feet tucked into the lower ring of the chair. I suddenly feel something hit me in my back pretty hard that I went stumbling off the stool. I scrambled to my feet and kinda froze in the room. I said hello. And immediately realized that's what every brown person says in horror movies before they're murdered, and sprinted to my grandmother's room. Lamau. I was pretty shook and told my mom months later, who said it was a sign from my grandfather. I can look back at it fondly now, but lol, teenage me almost peed her pants. Back when I was really young, I was in my grandparents' house with the rest of my family. I wanted to go play in the garden, but I had to ask if I could, so I went to the cave, cellar/basement if you prefer, to tell my grandpa. He was watching some old TV show on a really old black and white TV, so I asked him. He turned around and said yeah, no problem, but his eyes were red AF, like, I couldn't distinguish his pupil from the rest of his eyes. It was all plain red. I thought it was weird but didn't bother much. Then, I went to the kitchen to tell my parents that I was gonna play in the garden, and what I saw literally petrified me. In the kitchen, there was my parents, my grandmother, and my grandfather. I literally bugged. I rushed back to the cave and found what? Him? He was still there. Then I went back to the kitchen and asked them about Grandpa. They told me that he never left the kitchen. They weren't even joking. Also, he couldn't have left the cave to go there as I left it and went immediately to the kitchen. He couldn't have arrived there before me, and it's literally impossible for him to go to the kitchen without me seeing him. So I went back one more time, and this time nothing. He disappeared. To this day I'm still clueless to what the freak was that. Wasn't creepy so much as awe-inspiring. Part of me is convinced it was paranormal, and part of me thinks that's bullshit, and both parts are certain. That's creepy. Was I nuts? Were we all nuts? Here's what I saw a long time ago, written up on Reddit 4 years ago. Okay. I saw a green tiger. I wasn't alone. We were out towards the Cambodian border in summer of 1969, an American light infantry company of about 100 or so guys. We were operating in flatlands, thick jungle, along a river. Saigon River. Not sure. Bright, sunny day. We were proceeding single file when point platoon came to a stop. There was some yelling. We were stealthy. Yelling is bad. From the point, then point platoon radioed for the command post, CP. the company commander and his people, to come up to point. When we got there, we found the point team glaring at each other, some kind of tussle. Point and Drag were standing in the machine gunner's line of fire glaring at him. The machine gunner had wanted to shoot. Point and Drag stopped him. He didn't like that. The object of discussion was across a jungle opening maybe 15 meters away, just peeking at us over the elephant grass. It was a big tiger, biggest I've ever seen, Frank Frazetta style big, but without the lady. Here's the insane part. The tiger was white where a tiger is white and black where a tiger is black, but all the orange parts were a pale green. We all saw it, maybe 20 grunts and me. The machine gunner was arguing that we have to shoot it, because otherwise no one would believe it. He had a point. But the rest of us were just awestruck. I mean, it might as well have been an archangel, wings, halo and all. I felt an impulse to kneel. I don't think I was alone. The tiger stood there checking us out for maybe 15 minutes, not worried, not angry, just a curious cat. Then he turned and disappeared. Don't believe me? That's okay. I don't believe it myself. I mean, WTF was that? Hallucinogenic elephant grass? Some trick of the light? The tiger walked through some kind of green pollen just before we saw it. No freaking idea. I don't believe it, and I saw it. Or hallucinated it. Me and all my blues. Make of it what you will. I'm done. I don't believe in the paranormal in the traditional sense. No ghosts, spirits, demons, or any of that shit. I do believe that environments and objects can possibly absorb energy, karma, mojo, vibes, whatever you want to call it. For example, if someone is violently murdered in a house, that house will retain some fucked up energy. Anyway, back in 2001, I was living in NYC and was in a long-distance relationship with a woman in Colorado Springs. The first time I visited and walked into her house, I got hit with this ominous, oppressive feeling. I straight up said, "Whoa, what the fuck is wrong with your house?" She confirmed I was not imagining things and her house indeed had a disquieting feeling to it. The story she told me about her house wasn't paranormal, but it was still pretty weird. Her grandparents, the former owners, rented the basement out to some guy. The grandparents eventually sold the house to my ex, and she found some odd shit in the basement when she was renovating. There was a small hobbit door which led to a utility room, and in that room was a table. On that table was a scrapbook full of newspaper clippings about child disappearances. Not paranormal, but kind of creepy. Maybe the house drove this guy a little crazy.